may not have done visualization meditation before, it's important to feel that we've established the visualization. So even if you're not seeing it in sort of crystal clear detail, it doesn't mean that there's no benefit to visualizing. It's that sense that Amitabha Buddha is actually there that's the real essence of the technique. So over time, through repeated familiarization with visualization meditation, we can enhance the quality of our clarity of the image, and that's a skill that can be learnt through practice. So we shouldn't attempt to achieve everything first off, in other words, just relax and enjoy the process. As an artist, I find visualization meditation very, very wonderful because of its creative play. In visualization meditation, we transform and perform certain different activities within the visualization. And it's this fluency of flowing from one aspect of visualization to another without any break that becomes a very powerful tool for transforming the mind. It's also said that at death time, for example, when our gross conceptual consciousnesses begin to collapse and no longer function, that we can still perform visualization meditation beyond the point of the limits of conceptual language. So this is a very, very profound aspect of visualization meditation. And so meditators can practice visualization meditation in order to be able to use those techniques at the time of dying. So I just mention that as a stimulus, as an inspiration. And you might think I'm talking nonsense, but just think for a moment the power of our own minds, our current minds, untrained as they may be, to create incredibly vivid, evocative imagery in dreams. Your mind can do it. What blocks us is our sort of rational overlay that prevents us from utilising certain aspects of our mind. So it's worth remembering that as well. And also, intense desire has an incredible capacity to produce visualization as well. If I say, imagine the best homemade chocolate ice cream, you immediately invoke an image in your mind of that object. And that's how desire works, doesn't it, from moment to moment? We sort of enhance the visualization and the desire increases, and that enhances the visualization. So in Buddhism, we try to take that energy that's normally associated with desire and we transform it into an aspirational energy to become enlightened energy or like enlightened energy. And in that way, the more vivid that becomes, the more aspiration we have. The more aspiration we have, the more vivid our visualization becomes. And so it kind of generates a momentum that is very, very special. So these are all benefits of visualization techniques. So normally in our daily lives we use a combination of single-pointed concentration, visualization, transformational techniques and analytical meditation. And of course there's times when we're doing them all at once or do one within the other. So in this case we're going to be employing a visualization, but we're also then going to be going on to perform purification and sort of energizing visualizations and combining that with comprehending the meaning of the 8 verses, which of course becomes an analytical component, so that all those elements are there. And at the end of the day we're going to give away all the benefits of the meditation in the form of a dedication, and at that point I'm going to raise the spectre, the opportunity of either absorbing Amitabha Buddha into our heart or leaving Amitabha Buddha there as we go about our daily affairs when we leave the Gompa. So these are choices we can make, and it becomes again a very, very important way of training the mind in ordinary situations. We can begin to enhance our activities. using these techniques. So let's relax. You don't need to be looking at this because I'm going to read it out from the text, but you do know that you've got the text with you and you can take it home with you to use in your daily practice if you wish. So we sit in an appropriate and comfortable posture for meditation, allowing the mind to settle. Above our crown of our head, we visualize Buddha Amitabha facing in the same direction as ourselves. Amitabha is seated on a sun and moon disk. These are like cushions, radiant cushions of light, gold and luminous white. Amitabha has one face, two arms and legs, and is seated in a meditative posture with palms cradling a bowl of nectar in his lap. Amitabha wears the robes of a renunciate. His majestic body is radiant light, red, radiant light. At his crown is a white Om. It's like an intense bead of light, a seed of light from which light pours, white radiant light pours. At his throat, a red A, and in the heart, a blue Hung. So again, if we're not visualizing the Sanskrit syllables, we just feel very strongly that there's an intense, concentrated source of infinite radiant light coming from these three places, symbolizing enlightened body, speech and mind. So maintaining this visualization, we recite the 8 verses, contemplating their meaning, while seeking Amitabha's blessings to develop in our heart the aspiration that will be able to accomplish the highest welfare of all sentient beings, recognizing their great value and how we rely upon them. So the 8 verses of training the mind, with a determination to achieve the highest aim for the benefit of all sentient beings, which surpasses even the wish-fulfilling gem. May I hold them dear at all times. Whenever I interact with someone, may I view myself as the lowest amongst all, and, from the very depths of my heart, respectively hold others as superior. In all my deeds, may I probe into my mind, and as soon as mental and emotional afflictions arise, as they endanger myself and others, may I strongly confront them and avert them. When I see beings of unpleasant character oppressed by strong negativity and suffering, may I hold them dear, for they are rare to find, as if I have discovered a precious jewel treasure. When others out of jealousy treat me wrongly with abuse, slander and scorn, may I take upon myself the defeat and offer to others the victory. When someone whom I have helped or in whom I have placed great hopes mistreats me in extremely hurtful ways, may I regard him still as my spiritual teacher. In brief, may I offer benefit and joy to all my mothers, both directly and indirectly, May I quietly take upon myself all hurts and pains of my mothers. May all this remain undefiled by the stains of the 8 mundane concerns, and may I, recognizing all things as illusion, devoid of clinging, be released from bondage. So, due to recognizing how sentient beings are extremely precious, we now develop the definite determination: may I at all times hold them close and dear, and at all times see them as most precious. Then we extend that wish to promise that we will always benefit and help them all. We follow with this strong requesting prayer to Guru Amitabha: please bless my mind to be able to do so. Having made our request seeking blessings, we imagine that light rays and nectar descend from the 3 points of Amitabha Buddha. Light rays in the form of nectar descend from the crown, the throat, and the heart syllables. For our immediate purpose today, we're going to visualize these as the 3 colours: white light from the red light from the at the throat, and blue light from the hung at the heart. These light rays emerge and enter us as nectar. So feel this energy pouring down and into us from these 3 places, purifying our own body, speech and mind. As we visualize the nectar in the form of light being absorbed into us, we must feel it is in reality the essence of the qualities of Amitabha, his indestructible Vajra body, holy body, indestructible Vajra holy speech, and indestructible Vajra holy mind are understood as the embodiment of love, compassion, and wisdom. Descending and entering our crown, the nectar simultaneously purifies all defilements, particularly all negativities, obscurations, negative karmas and their imprints. In particular, it purifies all hindrances to developing the attitude of cherishing other sentient beings. All hindrances, particularly those of the self-cherishing mind, are completely overcome. All our negativities are eliminated from every pore of our body. As light and nectar pervades and fills our body, we also imagine we are filled with all the qualities of Amitabha, particularly those of wisdom, compassion, and cherishing other sentient beings. Likewise, we receive and develop qualities beneficial to our own well-being, such as increasing our life force, energy, merit and wisdom, and in particular, increasing the unmistaken attitude of cherishing other sentient beings. While performing the visualizations, we must have conviction that as the light and nectar descends into us, it completely destroys whatever disease or depressed state of mind we might have. Such problems can be imagined as a knot of some sort or lump within us. As the light rays and nectar reach and touch that lump, it completely disintegrates, just as when hot water is poured onto snow. So we're going to leave the visualization there for the moment and conclude the meditation. Just gradually drawing our attention back to the room. So there's different forms of these techniques, but the actual structure or progression of visualizations is found in common, even with very advanced visualization practices, which might, cover 100 pages of a written text in terms of their detail, still have these basic components. So it's good to keep that in mind. So are there any questions or thoughts about doing that particular meditation? Red. Amazingly red. Radiant, shimmering, blissfully ecstatic, luminous, pulsating, scintillating red. Unimaginable red. No, I wouldn't say brown. It's connected to the purification of our feeling aggregate. And so feeling is a real problem. Afflicted feeling is a real problem, because when we feel unpleasant or uncomfortable, we then have the capacity to generate a deluded thought. So if someone says something that we feel is inappropriate, we start to strategize how to get back, for example. So feeling goes to the very basis of mind generation, of affliction. So Amitabha represents the purification of the aggregate of feeling into an enlightened feeling, which is one, of course, qualified by being totally unbiased in its compassion and concern for others. So it's flawless. So the red sort of has a special, and it also has a special connection to speech as well, purification of speech. Because think about it, we get up to a whole lot of mischief with our speech. We get up to good things with our speech too. I was quoting to Jane earlier on, there's in Ocean Vuong, who I quoted earlier about the shadow of the mother falling on the body, he mentions the exit wounds of a harsh word. And that's quite an evocative line, isn't it? Because if we spit out some harsh words, they strike, penetrate, and leave an exit wound, a bleeding wound in the body of the object of scorn or hatred that we've just inflicted with our word. So words can be tools, and we need to take responsibility for that as well. So I thought we're still dealing with verse 2. Whenever I interact with someone, may I view myself as the lowest amongst all, and from the very depths of my heart respectfully hold others as superior. So Geshe Doga said in relation to this verse, one has reached the point where one has to cherish sentient beings as the most important source of one's temporal and ultimate happiness. Verse 2 is stating that we mustn't practice love and compassion with the idea of taking the benefit ourselves. If this is still motivated by the self-cherishing attitude, the results gained from this will be very small. If love and compassion, the practice of love and compassion, is done with a self-cherishing attitude, it will become the source of pride. We will engage in actions believing ourselves to be better than others. Does this apply to anyone here? The view of cherishing others is to be able to really benefit others, it is necessary to lessen one's pride, by thinking, I am no higher or above anyone else. This is really critical. So Geshe Doga adds, as long as we harbour pride in our mind, it will cause us to feel jealous of those who are doing better than us. We may feel contempt for those who are not doing well, and anger towards those who don't do what we want. Pride leads to many other negative states of mind and causes negative emotions to arise. So, I'm going to read a couple of stories now, which sort of illustrate, I think, the essence of this verse in a very beautiful way. So the first story is of Patrul Rinpoche, who was a great yogi, a sort of wandering yogi in Tibet. And he appeared as a ragged vagabond, completely without any affected attitude of his own importance or stature, completely humble. Once Patrul was returning home to Zachuka so that he could circumambulate the Page Mani wall. That's a wall of stones carved with the mantra of compassion. When he arrived, he came to a tent near the wall to ask for shelter. An old blind woman lived there, and she told Patrul he was welcome to stay. Patrul offered to serve as her servant, working for his keep. Every day he faithfully served her and made himself useful to her, making and pouring her tea and emptying out her bedpan, doing whatever needed to be done. Every day the old woman recited prayers aloud, supplicating the most famous Lama of Zachuka, Patrul Rinpoche, saying, "O Patrul, with your compassion, please think of me." Every day Patrul worked hard as the blind woman's servant. Every day after work he went to the Page Mani wall to circumambulate and do his meditation practice. A month went by in this way. One day some of Patrul's disciples came to the Mani wall, saw Patrul doing circumambulations, recognised him and began to prostrate to him. The old woman was sitting nearby. Though she was unable to see what was happening, she was able to hear what was being said, and she heard them referring to her servant as Patrul Rinpoche. Learning his true identity, she was embarrassed, and of course would not allow Patrul to continue doing as he had done. At this, Patrul Rinpoche scolded his student sharply, saying, "Your thoughtless prattle has done grievous harm to this poor old blind woman She's lost a good servant, and all because of you. Another story, Geshe Langri Thangpa and the baby. Once when the mendicant monk Langri Thangpa, another mentor of advice, was delivering a discourse to thousands of disciples, a sickly child was born nearby. An astrologer told the mother that to save the infant's life, she must take it to a high spiritual master and claim it to be his child. Obediently, the mother brought the baby to Langri Thangpa in the middle of his teachings and declared before everyone that it was his. He happily accepted it and said, "For all of my lives you have been my child." Half the disciples lost faith and immediately walked out. They thought it was his child of this life. The rest of the audience stayed. At the end of the discourse, the mother presented the master with offerings and apologised by explaining the situation. Langri Thangpa simply gave the child back. Throughout the entire scene, he maintained complete equanimity, and for the half of the disciples who stayed, their faith remained unaffected. If anything, it grew stronger. So these are really, really wonderful stories. I've got another couple, but I'll leave them for a moment. So Geshe Doga says, if this confrontation with others is done with respect in our heart and without a loss of love and compassion, the results will be much more fruitful than if we fight with the intention of getting back at the person or wanting them to lose. So Geshe Langri Thangpa, you'll notice, had no need from his side to defend his reputation, even in the face of the huge audience of people who had obviously a deep respect for his qualities and wisdom at that time. And he simply acknowledged the situation and accepted the child. Why would he not? He would accept any child under those conditions. And when the mother explained, he didn't sort of have to say anything to her or scold her or somehow redress the situation. He maintained equanimity. This mind of equanimity is unruffled by positive or negative circumstances. It's getting back to your point earlier, I think, about not having attachment. But it's not an inert, passive mind. It's a very vivid, responsible mind. It's one that's not tossed by the sway of being affected by whether things are appearing attractive, unattractive, or neutral. It simply looks at the situation before it. So, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that this idea of maintaining equanimity doesn't, this gets back to some of the questions before the break, doesn't invite us to be subservient. And this is really important, isn't it? Because the verse is sort of asking us, may I view myself as the lowest, not just low, the lowest amongst all. So what on earth are we talking about here? So it doesn't mean to be subservient. And this act of self-denigration isn't what's being discussed at all. So in Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Ways of Life, he refers to three kinds of pride that we should have. So I've got up here, you notice, virtuous pride and non-virtuous pride. So non-virtuous pride is the kind of arrogant pride that puts me above and everyone else below. And that's a kind of sentimentalising pride. It involves making judgments and then organising according to those judgments that I've made. It's deeply, deeply personally subjective, and it's sentimentalised because it's only written according to my story of where and how things are. So it's highly subjective in that regard. The kind of pride that's virtuous is different. So we should have pride, says Shantideva, in three areas: action, ability, and afflictions. Pride about actions means that no matter who else may be our companion as we practice the path, we do not count upon them, but accomplish it ourselves alone. This is really an extraordinary idea. Pride here is saying that I'm going to care for others irrespective of whether anyone out there appears to be there for me or caring for me. My resolve to care for others is unshakable, absolutely pure and stable in its focus. And to be able to hold that sense of certainty is a form of pride, but it's not a deluded pride, it's a sense of strength. I can use the word sort of mistresy or masterstry or whatever you want to call it here in the very best sense of the word. It's a certain acceptance of the dignity of our stance as a valid and important one. It's necessary to have that kind of pride because it means that we're going to be capable of acting in a positive way in any situation, even if we're not supported. Pride about ability means that we will accomplish our own and others' welfare, thinking, since living beings are under the power of afflictions, they are unable to achieve even their own welfare, much less the welfare of others. I am able to accomplish the welfare of both myself and others. Pride about afflictions means that with contempt for the afflictions on all occasions, we think, I shall be victorious over these. They shall never defeat me. It means being steadfast after you have generated the courageous thought to destroy the incompatible factors. So the incompatible factors here are the ones that are incompatible with happiness. So we have to be convinced that we have this capacity to overcome the afflicted thoughts. And so these kinds of strengths you can see here are much deeper than a kind of an egotistical conceit. It steps right outside of them. So reverence to others who are considered precious involves seeing them as superior based on a sense of equanimity. We don't assume that we're superior to them when we meet them. We assume that they are superior. Their needs are paramount. This is the kind of beginning of our operation. I've mentioned on one of my Monday nights the philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas. Does anyone read Levinas at all? He's a Jewish rabbinical theologian. And he has this sort of presentation where he argues that there is a first ethics. And that first ethics is founded on a direct encounter face to face with the other. The other is any other who appears to me. Levinas says that the very fact that we are seeing the other face to face is the foundation of our ethical stance not to harm. We don't, again, like Buddhism, we don't need to know anything about that other person. The very fact that they've appeared face to face is the ethical moment. So ethics precedes sociality. It precedes a social engagement. Social engagement is predicated on this fundamental ethics. And it's not an ethics that's metaphysical, it's not an ethic that's ideal or theologically driven. It's the fundamental realization that I don't harm you and you don't harm me. He says that's the basis of an ethical stance. At least not killing the other person, at least not killing them. So of course there's any number of graduations before that. And so Levinas talks in very interesting ways about this idea, but we don't have to take it literally when he says face to face. It doesn't mean you have to be gazing into the literal face of the other. He refers to a woman standing in a concentration camp line, looking at the nape of the neck of the person in front of them. And he says that they are meeting face to face. Because in encountering the nape of the neck of the person in front, they are having this fundamental encounter, face to face. So it's a very, very interesting idea. So it doesn't invite us to be subservient. And as I mentioned before, to be subservient is a sentimentalising function. It's profoundly patronising. So this idea of superiority here diffuses any kind of sentimentalised hierarchy in social stance. So I'd like to illustrate that with another Patrul Rinpoche story. While Patrul was travelling on foot across the vast plateaus of Golok, north of Zarchuka, he encountered a woman, mother of 3, whose husband had just been killed by the Chantang Dremong, the huge bear from the Himalayan steppes, a beast much more dangerous than the Dremong of the forests. Patrul asked the woman where she was going, and she told him she was headed for Drazchuka with her 3 children to beg for food, as the loss of her husband had left them destitute. Then she began weeping. "Kaho, don't worry," said Patrul, "I'll help you. I'm going to Drazchuka too. Let's travel together." She agreed, and so they walked together for many days. At night they slept outside beneath the sky. Patrul would nestle 1 or 2 of the children into the folds of his sheepskin coat, and the woman would similarly hold the rest. During the day, Patrul would carry 1 child on his back, the woman would carry the second, and the third would walk along behind. When the woman begged in villages and nomad camps they passed, Patrul would beg right alongside her, asking for sampa, barley flour, butter and cheese. Travellers they met assumed they were a family of beggars. No one, least of all the newly widowed woman, guessed the identity of her shabby companion. Eventually they reached Drazchuka. That day the woman went off on her own to beg for food, and so did Patrul. In the evening when they returned, the widow noticed that Patrul had a dark look on his face. The woman asked, "What's wrong? You seem annoyed." Patrul brushed it off, saying, "It's nothing. I had a task to accomplish, but the people here won't let me finish it. They're making a big fuss about nothing." Surprised, the woman asked, "What work could you have around here?" Patrul replied, "Never mind, just let's go." They came to a monastery on the side of a hill where Patrul stopped. He turned to the widow and said, "I have to go inside. You may come too, but not right now. Come after a few days." The woman said, "No, let's not separate, let's go together. Until now you have been so kind to me. We could get married. If not, let me at least stay at your side. I'll benefit from your kindness." "No, that won't do," replied Patrul, adamant. "Up till now I've done my best to help you, but the people here are troublemakers. We mustn't go in together. Come back in a few days. You'll find me inside." So Patrul went up the hill to the monastery, while the widow and the children stayed at the bottom of the hill begging for food. As soon as he was inside the monastery, contrary to his usual habit of refusing offerings, Patrul ordered that any provisions offered to him would be kept and put aside for that very special guest he was expecting who would be needing provisions. The next day, everyone in the valley had heard the news of the great Lama's arrival. Patrul Rinpoche has come, people said. He'll be giving teachings on the guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life. Men and women, young and old, monks and nuns, male and female, lay practitioners, everyone went hurrying to hear the great Patrul Rinpoche. People began to gather into a huge crowd, bringing along horses and yaks that carried their tents and provisions. When the widow heard the news, she was thrilled, thinking, "A great Lama has come. This will be my chance to make offerings and request prayers on behalf of my late husband." Along with everyone else, she climbed up to the monastery, bringing along her 3 fatherless children. The poor widow and her family had to sit at the far edge of the large crowd to hear Patrul's teachings. She was so far away that she could not see his features clearly. At the end of the teachings, like everyone else, she stood on the long line, waiting to receive the great Lama's blessing. Eventually, she was moved up the long line till at last she came close enough to see the great Lama. Patrul Rinpoche was none other than her shabby, kind, faithful travelling companion. Moved by both devotion and amazement, she approached Patrul saying, "Forgive me for not knowing who you were. You were like the Buddha in person. Forgive me for making you carry my children. Forgive me for asking you to marry me. Forgive me for everything." Patrul brushed off her apology lightly, saying, "Don't give it a second thought." Turning to the monastery attendants, he told them, "This is a very special guest I was expecting. Please bring all the butter, cheese and provisions that we have been setting aside especially for her." So again, a very beautiful, beautiful story. And it sort of exemplifies, doesn't it, all the meaning of this verse. So His Holiness says, we experience a sense of closeness towards people who are dear to us. We feel a sense of compassion and empathy for them. We also have strong love for these people, but often this love or compassion is grounded in self-referential considerations. So-and-so is my friend, so-and-so is my spouse, so-and-so is my child, and so on. What happens with this kind of love and compassion, which may be strong, is that it is tinged with attachment because it involves self-referential considerations. Once that attachment is there, there is also a potential for anger and hatred to arise. Attachment goes hand in hand with anger and hatred. For example, if someone's compassion towards someone is tinged with attachment, it can easily turn into the emotional opposite due to the slightest incident. Then, instead of wishing that person to be happy, you might wish that person to be miserable. I had a friend who was living in an architect design apartment block in St Kilda, and someone else in that block of flats had a jilted lover. And at night, the jilted lover hurled petrol bombs into the underground parking lot to bomb the boyfriend's sports car, which had represented some of their happiest moments together as they'd cruised with the top off. And what was amazing about this incident was that the entire apartment block caught alight. The fires went through all the PVC plumbing and jeopardised the lives of every person sleeping in that block. Was she thinking of that when she hurled the petrol bombs? All she wanted to do was get revenge on her partner by destroying the one thing that he perhaps loved more than her, his car. So that kind of perversity is written in to the ordinary emotional stakes, isn't it, of our sort of daily operations. It's a tendency. We don't have to get into it, but it's kind of a compulsive tendency. So you actually hear when people talk about relationship breakups, often people are applauded for showing revenge, aren't they? To take a stand, assert yourself, and so forth. So again, we have to be able to filter these things in a very skillful way and work out what's actually going on and how we might navigate. So are there any thoughts or feelings? Because we've covered a fair bit of ground on that verse. Everyone's going okay? Or tired, not tired? So let's just do a short reflective meditation, and it's a very simple one. And the premise of the meditation is that we're going to explore attachment as an attitude that exaggerates or superimposes good qualities onto a person, object, idea, and then clings to that object as a source of our happiness. So, reflect. What things am I attached to? This isn't an abstract exercise. I'm asking us to locate those things to which we are really attached. What people, which people are we really attached to? Again, identify actual people in our lives to whom we're attached. Now consider, what ideas am I attached to? This might seem more subtle, but it's very, very important. We often notice how other people are attached to certain ideas, but perhaps it's more difficult to see it in terms of ourselves. What are our pet ideas that we can't let go because of attachment, even in the face of reality or change? Now analyse how things to which we attached appear to us. What aspect do they appear to have when we hold them with attachment? This requires an honest appraisal. How do people to whom we're attached appear? Again, be honest. Now question, does this person to whom we're attached really have all the qualities I'm perceiving and attributing? So weigh up the difference, or is there a difference between our estimation of the qualities of this person and what is actually there? We might want to sift through actual experiences or incidents in our relationship with this person, just testing out this investigation. If there were moments of disappointment in this person, to what extent is that disappointment a product of our own mind, or an actual statement as to the inherent failure of the other person, or apparent failure of the other person to meet our needs or expectations? These are very real and vital investigations. And now investigate or conclude, do I develop unreal expectations of the personal thing, thinking that it or he or she or they will always be there, will continuously make me happy, etc.? Do we have this expectation? If so, how does it make me act? For example, do I forgo my ethical standards to get what I'm attached to? Do I get into dysfunctional relationships, or repeatedly? Again, is this a sign of the qualities of the other person or the object? or a sign of my fabricating mind. So the outcome of the meditation is to open the space or the path to look at things in a more balanced manner. For example, if it's a person we're dealing with, we recognize that this person has a changeable nature. They have weaknesses. They have natural limits. They have natural limits to bring me happiness. So we recognize the natural limits, in other words, rather than smothering it with idealized projections. And with this we can conclude the meditation. Any thoughts or feelings?
This is what it is. You said attachment to idea.
Yeah.
That I'm attached to a particular idea of a family.
Of a family. Yeah.
I imagine my family to be this, and I imagine that I need to do that.
Uh-huh.
It can actually be many different things.
Yeah. And so is that notion of the family a preconception, do you think? Like,
Yeah.
And there's a lot at stake in giving that up, it seems to be, if one was to give it up.
Probably evolutionary development, so it's more...
Yeah, an evolution.
It's more
Yeah.
And I was coming to this conclusion on how much I think that idea about needs and expectations is really important. I recognise now that sometimes where I find I have difficulty in my interactions with people is because I have these expectations of them that are unconscious, and then I go, oh, if that's my expectation and I can change that, then so I think that's important. That was leading on from an earlier thing and then again this one.
Yeah, I think it leads again to the compassion and cherishing them, that they can do only what they know how.
Well, it's them, isn't it?
Yeah.
Instead, it's not me. And so that's where I think I go wrong, because I'm introducing myself into the thing. When it's not about me, that's how they are, that's who they are, and that's it.
Yeah, but sometimes, especially when they are like people who you think, oh my God, how come you don't understand this? It's not about my expectation. This is what it's, just how things are. And then when they don't do it, you are hurt. But when you realize they can't because they don't know how. And it's like, for me, it's the first, hold them dear, to let them be happy their way.
Yeah. Or just accept that. Because the hurt bit comes in where you realize your expectation, and you let that go, and that's just how it is.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? When we talk about letting go of expectations, it sounds like we're amputating or losing something. Instinctively we think, oh, what am I giving up if I give up my expectations? I think Buddhism makes a really interesting distinction here between a kind of a desire that's driven by an afflicted mind and an aspiration. So wishing for someone to be happy or to have good circumstances is a projection of sorts, isn't it? But it's a positive projection. It's not going to interfere with that person's happiness. But if I project with desire ruling, that person is only going to be as important as their functionality in terms of fulfilling me. And so Geshe Doga, in some of his teachings, has stressed there's a complete distinction between love and attachment. Because attachment gives provisionally, it's like horse trading. I'll give you this if at the same time you give me this back. And if that process goes astray, we're in for real trouble. Both of us, we're going to be in a big mess. I'm going to make sure of that because you're not doing what you're expected to do. Love is giving with the aspect, may that person be happy, irrespective of what they reciprocate or don't reciprocate to me. So it's radically different. And so it's harder to see in reality that difference because the two, in ordinary circumstances, with ordinary minds, which we're talking about, they get mixed. Those two attitudes are mixed. And so again, it's like a mother's love is mixed. She has this incredible compassion and love for her child, and there may also be a degree of attachment, which means that she will preserve her child's happiness above the happiness of the child next door. So we're not blaming anyone here. We're just trying to look at the way in which the mind works and the way in which that then forms social attitudes and engagements. So we try to liberate our mind from attachment and generate love in its place, for example. And that freedom of giving involved in love has no limit. That's the important thing. Yeah.
So how do you, want to start with this, how do you love people when mean and sneaky? Do you try to think of it from their point of view, why they're in that situation, feel compassion for them, if they've got that state of mind, or how do you approach that?
You can't wade through the yuck to get to the good bits.
Maybe that's what I
No, I'm just asking, is that how it seems to you? Yeah.
Appreciate, politicians, I suppose, are the easiest.
Yeah.
You can, I suppose, appreciate the good things that they've done as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking of people in my personal life, I suppose, to take it from that, you can think of it.
Yeah.
So think of good that anyone's done, I guess.
Yeah. I'm just wondering whether this is still happening, this question you ask, which is a very real question,
That's probably something in the past.
is still happening within the frameworks of what I was calling before psychologization. That we're still trying to interpret it in terms of your qualities and my qualities and how they relate to each other. Whereas this idea of cherishing others as superior isn't reliant on an estimation of their qualities in terms of how they reflect me. Because they are a precious person wishing for happiness and not to suffer, just as we are. And they have the same potential.
They're precious from their own side and
Yes.
they're precious from our side because they help us grow and
Yeah,
help us
yeah,
implement the
yeah,
teachings.
yeah. So we look at them spontaneously as precious. We don't need to learn about them. Learn that terrible word, backstory. We don't need the backstory. There's infinite numbers of backstories. We're never going to get to the limit of the back journey, and we're never going to get to the limit of the end of the tail of their becoming. because our becoming is cosmologically scaled, in the sense that our potential is way beyond anything that we're currently thinking is our potential. So what's limiting us is our habitual self-view, which is so tight and constrained that it shuts down any other mental capacity, really, to grow or transform. This is getting back to the idea of being married or attached to an idea. This is a real problem. I think it's called, I've heard a word, I think it was dogma. Dogma. Someone's didactic, they're committed to dogma. They'll only see the world through the lens of their dogma. And if you shake their dogma, they become hostile and will attack and even kill. Sounds extreme, but look at the religious wars that are happening in the world through the power of dogmatic conflict. And so to what extent, when you're having an argument with your friend, do you hold your point of view until the dear end for dint of not losing? Like it's interesting, isn't it? How far you'll actually go to protect a totally untenable, laughable position in the name of maintaining your dignity and your stance. But it's founded on this psychological story of who you are.
What do people sabotage a project?
Yeah, well, it can be very practical, kind of like a work environment.
Which is different to...
Yeah, and it can be a real sabotage.
You take yourself out of it, you don't want the project to fail.
No.
It's going to benefit others.
Yeah.
And if someone's trying to sabotage that, then...
But then how do you skillfully relate to that? That's where the question comes back again. Yeah.
Maybe if it fails, that would be the benefit. Who are we to decide?
Maybe to me, but it may be beneficial to me if it failed to get stuck in my ego, but...
But who are we to
Yeah.
decide what is good and what is bad?
Well, if it's a request from my teacher, then I would imagine it would be a good thing to implement. So I guess it's a little bit different, but otherwise you have to have the points.
Well, the only thing that helps is to think about how his homeless has handled being a refugee. I mean,
Extraordinary.
all the best in Tibet, holy men, holy institutions, and the Chinese have smashed it up. What does his holiness say about people who, the difficult people? He says human beings can be troublemakers, and he's still fond of them.
Yes, so one of our, we have a sort of a bodhisattva commitment, an awakening mind commitment to rescue all beings from suffering. And I was talking about this idea on one of the Monday nights, and someone one of the people who had attended put up their hand and they said, well, I had a really, really difficult relationship with my mother, and I don't want her to be enlightened. And I remember replying that you can't generate the awakening thought of wishing to become enlightened for all beings and leave out your mother of this lifetime. Because that's all she is. I mean that in a good way. She's only your mother of this lifetime. And so getting back to your, I think, question too, we're trying to look in a bigger way. And so the immediate relationship and problem we have is just an immediate relationship and problem. It's not actually addressing who the other person is or what they potentially might be. So we get stuck in the moment. We read the story of the moment and it becomes the future by dint of our commitment to looking at it as reality. But it's not, it's just an ephemeral shudder in time, in the bigger picture. Yeah. So there's wonderful stories in the sutras about reincarnation stories where your dearest enemy becomes your child nestled in your hands in its next rebirth, for example. It's kind of good to keep that scale of things. Yeah. I think there's a real burden in Western thought. We were talking before, this I need to actualise the self as a kind of realisation of individualisation. It's a sort of psychological commitment we have now. It's an imperative, and it's actually very burdensome because it can't be met. It's actually a form of desire. It's not possible to have this perfectly, well, there is, you can talk about integration in a very deep way, but this isn't a deep integration. You know, there's a sense, they talk now about digital melancholia. I don't know if anyone's been following these stories, but young people addicted to TikTok and Facebook and so forth are suffering a form of virtual depression, which is based on not having their desire object. It's all the time being repeated and removed simultaneously. So they keep having to reinvent themselves as desirable, post it, then count the number of likes, and then they rise and fall in dependence on that response, and then have to reinvent themselves to be likeable again. And at some point they become exhausted and they become depressed, or can become depressed. And so this is really, really interesting. That's sort of a metaphor, in a way, for the way in which we're living. So this idea of virtuous pride we were talking about before is a strength that's not going to be cajoled or swayed by those sorts of incidental operations. This commitment to caring for the other isn't obscured by any of that micro fuss to which there's no limit.
So do you think like expectations set you up for disappointment all the time?
Yeah.
Is it like that?
Oh, you mean that disappointment's built into the expectation? Yeah.
You have it immediately, you're going to have at some point be disappointed.
Yeah. So do you understand that in terms of how desire operates?
It's wishing for a thing that is outside of you, really.
Yeah.
And that's in people or in projects or in politics. Or,
Hmm.
so there's always going to be that. So I guess you have to learn how to live with that too. Is that part of this?
Well, living with it's not quite the word, I think. To work with it,
Yeah.
certainly. Yeah. I mean, there's a sort of chronic pathological optimism built into desire structures, because we keep getting another one of those things that we thought were going to make us happy last time, but this one's actually a better one. Because I live in Armidale, I visit the op shops in did anyone go to the Glenferrie Road op shops, Salvation Army? There are racks and racks and racks of women's clothes, and there are racks and racks of urgent shoppers shuffling through the items, looking for those goods that are going to bring happiness. Now, we're all doing the same thing. I'm not judging them. It's sort of a metaphor for shopping. In a way, desire is shopping. Put in one word. It's the same mechanism as shopping. People in High Street who are shopping, do you know High Street Armidale? It has more wedding dress shops than anywhere else in the Southern Hemisphere. No, it's true, it's a fact. People come from other countries to go to High Street to buy wedding dresses. It's wall-to-wall wedding dresses. And there is a certain trance, I've noticed, amongst the shoppers. And they walk, they meander on the footpath, not able to walk in a straight direction because they see things in the windows and they're drawn to the window, and then they float away, and then they're drawn to another window and they float away. And that kind of ambulance is totally different to walking home. It's shopping. And so they're hovering the desire object in front of them and trying to find out whether it's the same object that's on the other side of the glass window of the shop. And so they're evaluating all the time. And it's never the same object, going back to your point, so they're continually shopping.
So what does it mean about optimism?
Well, there's optimism on optimism. So optimism based on an afflicted mind is hopeless, actually. And optimism based on a realistic appraisal of reality is profoundly optimistic. There is optimism, but most of our optimism is kind of distorted. I'll be happy not with this one. I had one of those relationships before. Gave it my best. Didn't work. I'm sorry, it didn't work. But this one's going to be this one's a good one. I've told all my friends this one's really good. And it's going to work this time. And I want you to help me make it work. And there we go. It's going to work. So that kind of optimism may or may not be successful, depending on how realistic it is in its appraisal of who the other person is in this case. So in that meditation, we're trying to estimate the degree of exaggeration that's been superimposed on the object. So in Buddhism we say that the object of desire is actually fabricated from the side of the mind. There's an initial attractable aspect to the object which is seized upon. We then embellish that aspect by exaggerating it until it overwhelms the entityness of that object, apparently, and then we seek to grasp and remain glued to it like oil to paper. And so at that point of desire, to be separated from the object becomes a form of excruciating pain because we're so heavily invested in it. And so Buddhism says that that mind of desire develops incrementally in stages from the foundation of finding that object initially attractive. So that aspect of attractiveness can just be a tiny little portion of the object. But 10 minutes down the track, this person is the best ever that I've come upon. This is the one. Like people talk about this as the one. The one. And not just the one for now, but forever. These bridal shops have got names like Forever. I find it scary to have a bridal shop called Forever. Who would want to be a bride forever? No, but really, it's got the whole notion there of this sort of infinite extension of these moments of desire is kind of scary, really.
Can that optimism be related to feelings as well? Like we sort of want to be happy and feel good.
That's all right, though. Yeah.
And it's not possible.
Well, it's not impossible.
No, it's not impossible, but it's our bodies will have pain. We are people. Sometimes we'll be miserable. Sometimes we'll be tired.
Yeah.
And all of it is okay. We don't have to be peacefully happy all the time.
No.
Can that be called like this realistic optimism that we just...
Yeah, I think that's a good observation again. You can be realistic about being, and you can have moments of happiness too. And not to acknowledge those would be foolish. You know, why would you not acknowledge them? On what basis would you not? So, but there are moments when we think we're happy.
No, what I mean is, you know, the person, you know, buy this dress and you'll be happy. Buy this car, put this cream on your face, you know, take this tablet, you know, go and meditate and you will be happy.
Yeah.
And then you start meditating, it's like, oh my God.
Not working.
You know, actually, there is so much that, you know, that is actually not good. You know, and I have to face it, and I have to process it, and it's okay. So is the optimism that you talk about?
Yeah, and I think it's a good observation. We do, unfortunately, collapse our meditational expectations into a desire framework, which for most of us effectively kills off any potential we have to develop a stable ongoing practice and, in fact, a successful process of transformation. We circumvent it. Yeah. So if we expect too much from our meditation and it's not met, it's the same as expecting too much from another person and it's not met. We ditch them and go for another one. And so this mentality of shopping for spiritual practices is something that's endemic in the juggernaut of Western carnivorous cultural absorption. It really is. It's a grotesque moment in history where the West is absorbing everything. We're patenting at this very moment Aboriginal herbs so that they become chemically controlled by companies and can no longer be marketed by Aboriginal communities because they've been patented in China, for example. What's going on here? You know, sacred knowledge, Indigenous knowledge, is being used to discover the medicine, and then it's being patented and taken away. These are really, really extraordinary moments that we live in. So there's this absorption all the time.
So how do you love the people who are doing that?
Well, you don't love them because they're doing that. You have to accept that they're a precious human being under the burden of doing that. Because I don't think anyone's going to admire that. It's just greed. So we're allowed to acknowledge greed, we're allowed to acknowledge danger.
Still acknowledge their preciousness.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So, do you want to have a short tea break, or